How are we all doing today?
Great.
Okay, so I'm going to begin by telling you I'm not selling you anything today at all. So you can relax, you can enjoy, and I hope that the message that I deliver to you today is meaningful for you. I'm going to do something today that is a little bit different than what I normally do when I speak. Because normally I speak on business topics, I speak on personal branding, and this is a business topic, but you'll see why it's a little bit different. And how many of you in here, you've given speeches on business topics? I'm sure quite a few of you have. Have you ever given a topic on something very, very personal, something that very few people know about? Has anybody done that? Right? We all agree that that's a lot harder to do, right? It's a lot harder. You're exposing yourself, you become more vulnerable. And in today's world, I guess for us macho guys, being vulnerable is probably a good thing, right? In today's world. Okay, so with that being said, let me tell you a little bit about my story. You can see, if you look on the screen, you can see how to connect with me. I'm a big social media guy. Please feel free to connect with me. I love when people who listen to me actually connect. I answer everybody. I have a little ADHD myself, so if you tweet at me, LinkedIn me, whatever, Facebook me, I'll write you back and post and talk with you. So please feel free to do that. Okay. So I am Matt Sweetwood, and I'm here to tell you that I have been living with the idea that the best laid plans of men often go awry. And it turns out that the plans that I had created for my life didn't go exactly as I would have hoped. I also have been following Murphy's Law, which says that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. I seem to be following that law for about a decade. So the question is, why am I here to talk to you about success? Right? My talk is how to quit and turn disaster into success, when it sounds like a lot of things in my life have gone wrong. Well, it turns out that what I went through really caused me to buckle at the knees for many, many years, and I'm sure it would have a similar effect on others, maybe even you. And when you come through that kind of circumstance, you gain the kind of wisdom and the way to solve problems in a way that's meaningful. And the thing that I found, and this sort of theme carries through my speech, and it actually carried through some of the other talks, is that if you want something really bad enough, you can make anything happen. Right? I have a saying, you can't have everything that you want, but you can have any one thing that you want. The only thing I haven't been able to figure out is how to fix that, but okay, right? So if I can cure the baldness problem, right, if we can do that, that's like the, okay, so here's what we're going to try to sell today. We're going to sell a product to make bald guys with hair. I mean, that's like the big money maker. If we can figure out how to do that, right? Right. I agree. You know, there was an article that actually said that. They surveyed women. So how many women in here think bald is sexy? I do. See, it's unanimous, okay? So this is being videoed, so I want you to know that every person in the audience raised their hand. Every woman. Every woman. Every woman. Okay. Okay. Every woman. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit. I sort of built up to that. Let me tell you a little bit about my story. So after getting my master's degree in theoretical mathematics from the University of Pennsylvania, I went to work in our family business. I put into practice what I had learned, those sort of mind techniques like we heard, you know, being analytical and so on. And this business was a photo distributor. My goal when I came out of college, I had this big ego, you know, I was very young, you know, in my 20s, and I said, we're going to make this company into one of the best, if not the biggest photo distributor in the country. And we actually had some success doing that. I'll tell you a little bit, since it's a business crowd, I'll tell you a little bit about the business model. We ended up being one of the largest distributors of photographic supplies. How many people in here remember film? Okay. Because sometimes I do that and we have a younger crowd, a very, very young crowd, and they look at film, they have no idea what I'm talking about. My company actually at one point represented 5% of all the rolls of film sold in the United States, which is a pretty impressive feat because there were billions and billions of rolls of film sold. Our customers, we were a B2B business to start with. They were primarily small stores, retail outlets, camera stores, tourist shops, pharmacies, and even eventually professional photographers. And the business model that I had put into place were low prices, quick delivery, and just the best customer service on earth. At the same time, in my personal life, I had a very beautiful wife. I had 5 children, 5 young children at the time. I know that's like a lot in today's world, not for some of us, but a lot in today's world. And so I was an overachiever, right? You'll sort of see that as I go. It's that ADHD thing, an overachiever, doing that kind of thing. The American dream was right there. It was like in my grasp. And then the bottom started to drop out. Okay, the first thing that happened was the business, right? I mentioned film. Okay, so the first thing that happened, remember I told you that we sold small stores, drugstores, pharmacies. So the small stores, particularly the drugstores, all started being bought up. How many people know a small drugstore in their town that was actually taken over by a CVS or a Walgreens, right? A few of you know that, right? So all of those stores, and at one point, drugstores actually accounted for 80% of all the films sold in the United States. So as they got bought up, Walgreens buy centrally, they wouldn't buy from a company like me. And then we also know the big box stores like Walmart and Target and Kmart, they started to wipe away the town center stores. Right, so all small town America and those small Main Street stores all went away. Those were our customers. The number of camera stores went from over 10,000 to a few thousand to actually a few hundred. Business starting to be in a little bit of trouble, 5%. Imagine the staff I had and all of the things that go with it. The second attack on the business, okay? This is film sales from 1965 to 2008. And seemingly overnight, the digital camera replaced the film camera. In fact, there was a turning point really around the turn of the century. So Y2K was not a good period of time if you sold film, like my company did. So what happened was digital cameras were being sold everywhere too, right? It wasn't just at a camera store. When you bought a 35mm camera or film, you went to a camera store. But now digital cameras were available at the big box stores, Walmart, Target, Best Buy. And the product soon became available onto the internet, including the emergence of Amazon, which we know has killed many, many businesses. Not hating on Amazon, they have an amazing business model. And Jeff Bezos actually is my age, same haircut, different wallet. Okay, right? So amazing what he's done over there. But my business was like watching a slow motion train wreck, okay? Slowly watching this business that I had built, my hotshot ego, I had done all of this stuff. Okay. So if the collapse of my business wasn't bad enough, let's say an earthquake happened in my personal life. Remember I told you I had 5 kids? Well, their mom left us. She left us in a violent fit when my kids were 18 months old to 8 years old. Okay? She left and left for good, never came back. In fact, the only contact we'd have with her was when she would sue me in court for every dollar that I had. Crazy judicial system in New Jersey. Meaning that the guy here, I was raised by 60s and 70s parents. My dad's only contact with a diaper was watching a Pampers commercial on TV. We all know if we're from that generation, being a single dad is, something we're just not equipped to parent. So I was the guy who headed off to work every morning, kissed the wife on the forehead with the briefcase and earned the money and came home, and now all of a sudden I had 5 little kids to take care of. Ages 18 months, still in diapers through 8 years old. My business was failing. I was involved in a crazy, crazy divorce, which I'll talk a little bit about before. And I had 5 struggling kids standing in front of me, who were emotional, who were upset, and they were abandoned by their mother, of course. And they turned to me to get them through. And needless to say, I was a scared, scared young man, okay? But I know I needed to be enough. I certainly hoped I would be enough. Okay, business dying, wife gone, 5 little kids to take care of, crazy court system like I told you, right? It seemed to be bent on actually destroying me. And so I got an idea that I'd run away, right? That's what best thing to do is just run away. So I had this fantasy I'd go to Hawaii and be a surfer. Okay. But I don't really balance very well on a surfboard, so. But in all seriousness, the reality is I had 5 little kids who looked at me, and I had 100 human beings at work who were relying on me. So running away was definitely not an option. So this is out to you guys, and Orly sort of alluded to it in the beginning. right? No matter how difficult your circumstance is, no matter how deep the hole is, the best way to start is just to take steps to get yourself out, small steps, right? So every journey is comprised of small steps. And that's true in personal life or business life, right? And if you keep putting one foot in front of another, hopefully you eventually pull yourself out of the solution. So step by step, I started walking out. Okay, so this talk is called Using the Quit Method. So our success lesson number one of my favorite ones, that's why it's number one, is quitting means you failed, so don't. Right? If you don't quit, as long as you're still breathing, there is definitely still hope for success. And that's something I learned along the way. Never quit. In fact, I recall as a kid, when I used to sit in front of my father's desk, he had a poem up on the wall. It was in a frame. This old frame, I remember. It was sitting on his wall, never moved it. It was a poem called Don't Quit. Anybody ever see that poem? It's a famous poem. It actually now is an internet meme, of course. If you type in "don't quit," some Facebook link will come up with the meme or something like that. Okay, so in this big mess, what to do? And so many times the problems we're faced we've never seen before, right? This is a problem I never saw before. Didn't anticipate it. Wasn't in the plan. Didn't plan to have these 5 little kids in my ownership, in my care, and certainly the problems in my business were new to me. Who would have guessed that digital cameras would be invented? Who would have thought that, all of these big stores would wipe out the small towns going along the way? So, success lesson number 2 is the first thing you need to do is understand all the aspects of your problem before you initiate any of the solutions. So I'm sitting here in this problem, and my first step was really just to evaluate. I know I was panicked, I was in fear, I was in all of those things. And one of the first things you need to do when you're in any problem, and I know this sounds like it's almost too elementary, but it's actually not. Because many times we're in circumstances that we've not seen before, and we think we understand the problem, but sometimes it's worthwhile to take time to understand the problem. I use an example when we elect a president. No, we're not going to go political here. But they always say the first 100 days, right? Why did they give the first 100 days to the president to measure him? Because when he takes office, he needs 100 days to really understand the problem, right? You think, everybody campaigning for president and being president have nothing to do with each other. So it takes a while. You get in there and you have like a, oh my gosh kind of moment. And so they always give the president 100 days. So I sort of took that on myself and I said, look, I'm going to take 100 days. I didn't really think exactly like that at the time, but looking back, it's kind of what I did. And so I took 100 days to understand the problem. And one of the steps that you want to take in that 100-day understanding is to really take a look at the resources that you have. Like, what resources can you marshal to help solve your problem? Okay? That brings us to success lesson number 3, the I in my QUIT formula. Innovate new solutions and problems to achieve your goals. Another one that seems a little bit obvious, but let's really think about it. We're trying to understand what we're about, understand the nature of the problem, and we need to innovate. So innovate is a word that's used over and over and over again. And I'm going to bring a little bit of my math background in here. Everybody thinks that math is a precise science. You add up a bunch of numbers. But when you study theoretical mathematics and you are solving highly complex problems, a lot of times it's your intuition. You need to innovate. You need to be creative in your approach to logic. Think about that. You need to be actually creative in your approach to logic. So in order to innovate, you take a look at your resources. You try to understand the problem. But what if the resources that you have to solve your problem are not there for you? Right? I have these 5 kids to take care of. What do I do? How do I take care of them? I have business collapsing. What do I do? How to take care of them? Okay? So the first thing you can do is you can look inside your organization. Do you have the resources? Or you can look outside your organization. Okay? And it's probably going to require you to think outside the box. Another cliche, but sometimes you have to do that. You have to really look at what kind of resources, what kind of people you have. So maybe in your company, if those of you who run companies or have been involved in companies, maybe you have a staff that isn't tasked exactly like you like. So you might want to take a look at your people, sort of ignore the roles that they have. A great example, let's say you have an accounting person, right? The accounting person in your company may just be watching the marketing bills go by one after another. So rather than go to your marketing department and ask them how to reduce the marketing budget, maybe you go to your accounting person and you find something like, if we pay 3 bills in advance, they'll give us a 5% discount. So sometimes you want to actually go to people who are outside their roles and see if you can get something out of them or find ability or talent they have. Sometimes I remember an example in my company where we had a woman who used to show up in meetings, just take the notes in the meetings for us, very quiet, never said anything. One time we asked her what her opinion was, and she actually came up with the solution. So sometimes that person sitting in the corner of the room who's quiet might actually have the solution to your problem. So you want to forget the sort of ingrained notions you have about your resources and give them a chance to break out. Some people might surprise you. 3 examples from my work that I'll give you, actually from the company that I ran. I had a young man, his name was Nando, and he actually was legally blind. It wasn't like he couldn't see, but he was legally blind. We brought him in a government program to work in our accounting department. And when my accounting manager quit, I went and I spoke to Nando and I said to him what was going on. And in a short amount of time in speaking to him, I realized he had a photographic memory for figures. So he would look at them really close, like he'd have to see them up, and he could recall the books off the top of his head. Wow. We actually gave him a chance to be finance manager of the company, and to this day, 20 years later, he's actually the finance manager. Then there's Scott. He was a 21, 22-year-old kid, came into work in the company. He was a graphic designer. He used to work for me, design my brochures and things like that, and I'd give him business cards to design. And then I started to talk to him and realized that he had a really good aptitude for marketing. So over a very short amount of time, we let him be assistant marketing manager and then marketing manager. We're almost 20 years later, and now he's vice president of marketing in the company. He actually runs one of the largest retail stores in the country and the largest photography education program in the country. And then there's Damien. Damien, Polish kid from Brooklyn, barely spoke English when he came to work for me. My warehouse manager seemed to just rely on him way too much. And I kept going through warehouse managers. I have a personal thing, warehouse managers frustrate the hell out of me because I believe that warehouse managers are supposed to work their ass off and not delegate. And the only person in the warehouse seemed to be working was Damien. So one day, a warehouse manager, I think one left and one I just gave a little bit of the kick out of the building. And I went to him and I said, "Can you run this place?" And in his broken English, he said, "Yes, that was 20 years ago." He runs the largest warehouse of photographic supplies on earth right now. Wow. And he manages 20 or 25 people. So it's the potential, seeing potential in your resources, right? Going back to, we have these big problems we're facing, right? So taking a look at those potential resources is what can potentially lead to greatness and actually lead you out of the problems that you're in. Okay. At home, I had to do something similar. Now, the kids probably couldn't take care of themselves. You guys see the movie Home Alone? We know that movie with Macaulay Culkin, right? So that was like one little blonde kid who seemed to be really clever. I don't think my kids are quite as clever, but okay. Anyway, I had 5, couldn't leave them home alone, right? And so what was I going to do? How was I going to take care of them? And I was operating out of fear. I'm standing here before you. I've got a really stylish jacket on, and I'm looking good, hair looks good, and all that stuff, and I feel really good in front of you. But I'm telling you, back then I was 30-something years old, and I was just scared out of my mind. Okay? Court system coming at me, business failing. We talked about all of those things. But I knew that if I made decisions out of fear, I could make the wrong decision with my kid. And at that point, I was in a custody fight for my children. So if I didn't do the right thing, I could lose custody. My kids could come out screwed up. I mean, for those of you that have children, one of our biggest fears as parents is actually having our kids end up in jail some point along the way, right? I know that's a little dramatic, but we have children. We look at them and we're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And all of that burden was actually on me. So I didn't, like I said, I didn't want to make a decision out of fear. And I thought, what do? I got 5 kids at home. They're emotionally upset. The house was in a complete disaster because my ex, or soon-to-be ex, she had a little bit of a shopping problem and a little bit of a disorder problem and all sorts of things. The house was a mess. So can you imagine, right? How many people here used nannies or have had nannies or something like that, right? If you have kids, you use, right? So you use nannies. If you dial 1-800-NANNY and they come in and they see 5 little kids screaming and running through the house, and the house in a mess and a disaster and, courts and all sorts of stuff, they're going to say, "See you." So we had to be a little bit innovative about what we did. And in that picture, you see the two young ladies in the picture in the dark hair, one of them holding my son Zach and one of them holding my daughter Rebecca in the picture. They're actually young Israeli women. And I happened to have somebody who was working for me who was Israeli. And in a conversation with him, he suggested that the best solution to my problem was to bring in some tough young ladies who had just come out of the Israeli army and bring them in. That turned out to be one of the best decisions that I ever made. And to this day, I am still indebted to those two young ladies because they were amazing. Okay? So sometimes you have to think out of the box, you have to be innovative, you have to do something proactive, something incredible in order to make it work. Bringing us to success lesson number 4, right? This is a big one, is do not let fear cause you to make hasty or bad decisions, right? Because when we do that, the consequences can be catastrophic. That's really hard, right? It's really hard when your emotions get involved in decision making, right? Sometimes you have to think clear, but if you're desperate enough and you want something enough, you're going to hear me say that, you can put yourself, in control. Okay, I had a similar situation to deal with my son Zach. That's him right there. He was 5 when his mother left him. I won't get into some of the things that happened to him in his interaction with her because we want to keep it a little bit above the line here. But he was very, very traumatized. In fact, he stopped speaking. So imagine your 5-year-old stopped speaking. He would speak to me. That would be it. It would sort of be like, it almost was like my little, pet child walking around because the only person he would actually speak to me. In fact, I think he had something like ADHD or ADD, but back then, whatever. They didn't have labels like that and so on. In fact, I always used to joke, we used to call him the Zach attack, because if I would go in a restaurant, and they weren't, I had my 5 kids with me, they weren't serving me, I would just be like, Zach, go play. And he would just tornado through that restaurant. You'd watch that service just go boom right into us. Okay. You got to keep I know this is a serious story here, but you got to keep your sense of humor about this kind of thing, which we all did. But in all seriousness, he had trouble concentrating, right? His schoolwork was failing, and then I imagined him, that cute little kid, in jail at some point later in his life. So we didn't want that to happen. People told me that I should medicate him, that I should put him in military camp, I should get him psychological help, all sorts of constructive kinds of advice which I got from people around town and as they would talk about me behind my back and so on. But I decided to do something different. I decided to think a little bit outside the box. I said, okay, he's running around like a lunatic. Let's put him in soccer. And so I put him in competitive traveling soccer. And why did I do that? Right? Because I understood the nature of the problem in depth. And by putting him in soccer, what did he have to do? They ran him, he was on a traveling team. They put him in, they ran him like 5 miles a day. Right? When the coach tells you to answer you, right, speaks to you and says, Zach, what are you doing? If he doesn't answer him, he has to run more laps. So he'll quickly start speaking. I know it sounds like a little bit of tough love, but it really was. He had to relate to his teammates. It socialized him. I'll get a little bit to the end of the story, but that's him at, I think he's 17 years old. Zach ended up being a championship soccer player. He played on a high school state championship team. He was an all-state player, and he got a scholarship to college out of it. Okay, but I'm foreshadowing a little bit. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened to the other 4 kids as time goes on. Okay, success lesson number 5, right? Know and when you need to think and act outside the box. The best leaders actually do it. Now, you can stand in front of a whole bunch of motivational speakers, and they'll always give you this line you have to think, but I'm asking you to do it with careful thought. You don't want to always be outside the box, or then you're viewed as outside the box, and that's not always a good thing to do. It's those key moments. I would actually say success in your life can actually be determined by when you know when to do that. And as I've lived life on this earth, for me, I've spent a lot of time trying not to conform and not to always do what everybody tells me to go with my gut. And in that case, and when I certainly used the example of my son, it was what was in my heart. Okay. Like my BMW? Right? Anybody know what that BMW is? Come on, guys. Any car guys in here? Or gals, sorry. Oh, geez. car house in here, that is an E39 M3. Okay, now I told you that my wife had left us for good to never return, maybe, in court a few times, but that wasn't exactly true. During the 6 months in which she painfully moved out of the house in front of her children, we had many, many episodes of her acting in a violent and outrageous manner. One day I received a call from one of those young Israeli young ladies at work, and they said, I'm not doing impressions or anything like that, but in that, you can hear it in sort of that Israeli accent, and she would say, your lovely wife is here, and she's breaking up the house, meaning smashing dishes, kicking holes in walls, screaming at the children. What should we do? Well, I said, my dear Anat, take the children and go to Burger King. Because for some reason, by the way, these girls love Burger King. I don't really know why either. There must be a shortage of Burger King in Israel or something like that. I have no idea. And they also love ketchup. It was a bizarre kind of thing. They thought that was a vegetable, but that's for a different speech. Okay. And so they took the kids out of the house because we really wanted to keep the kids separated from when their mother had these difficult episodes. And I went home. I said, I'm going to go home. I'm going to let her scream at me for a while, and then she's going to pick up the rest of her stuff and move out of the house. Well, I went home. I tried to calm her down. It was actually not such a clever idea on my part. It didn't work. So I decided that I was going to leave. And that car was in my garage. It was my pride and joy. I had worked very, very hard to have that thing. I ended up actually racing cars like that and stuff on a track. So I walked out, and I was sitting in this little car, actually, I had gotten for the nannies to drive because they needed to split up and drive the kids. And all of a sudden, the garage door opens. And my wife walks out of the garage dangling the keys to that car in her hand. Very calmly, all of a sudden, from screaming, she walks up to me. I was just, 50 feet behind that in my car. I put down the window to the car. You can imagine my heart's going tum, 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 like this kind of thing. She dangles keys very calmly, just looks me in. She goes, Matt, my dear, she goes, you love this car more than you love me. And she goes, when the car is gone and I'm gone, you're going to regret it. And she very simply turned around, walked back to the car, and I'm just telling you, I'm just shocked. Shocked is not even the right word. I'm just sort of like, my hands on the steering wheel of my car, could barely move or speak. She gets in the car, starts the car up, pedal to the metal, zooms out of the garage backwards, almost hits me, and then zooms down the driveway at full speed, bucking as it goes down. That was a stick shift car. She had no clue how to drive a stick shift. Goes out onto the main road and disappears. Okay, what did I do? What should I do? Right? What would you do? Sitting there in the car, drove away. We'll get to that. Imagine you're at work. I'm sure many of you faced a difficult situation where you see a coworker or somebody at your work who's photographing private equipment and stealing it. Or maybe they're just stealing something from the company. What do? Do you report them? If you report them, maybe people think you're a snitch. Maybe they'll think you helped the person. If you don't report them, they'll think you're disloyal to the company. What about if you know somebody who's being sexually harassed? What do? What if it's your boss? We all understand the consequences for making decisions in difficult circumstances like that, right? What if in a personal life, what if your friend's husband is cheating? What do? Anybody ever been faced with something? I won't ask that. A little bit difficult question, but we've all been faced with difficult circumstances like this. Okay, so what did I do? I called the cops on my wife. For me, that was the most difficult decision I had ever made in my life. I grew up old-fashioned. You don't call the police on family, and you don't call the police on the mother of your children. So the police came. They showed up. It was like a really big day in this small town in New Jersey. Like 8 cops showed up and the whole thing. They didn't find her. But she eventually showed up. Okay? She showed up screaming wildly, screaming at the cops. They ended up getting in an altercation with her, literally a physical altercation. So I was standing there, I remember, in the kitchen of my house. One part of me is like, thank God they got her. And the other part is when they're tackling her to the ground, I wanted to jump on the cops and beat them up because they were tackling my wife. So it was a very, very difficult circumstance for me. They unfortunately hurt her, I don't want to say badly, but they bruised her a little bit. So it was a difficult day for me, but I believe that it was the right decision to do at the time. Of course, there's some consequences, which we'll get to later when the cops showed up and put me in cuffs a few days later. Success lesson number 6. Here's one of the hardest ones. Don't let emotions interfere with making the best decision. Right? So there was about as emotionally charged a circumstance as you can possibly have. But did I make the right decision? I think I made the right decision. She could have hurt somebody. She could have hurt herself. Despite what ended up happening to me in the end, I still believe to this day it was the right decision. Success lesson number 7. This is more of a proverb, more of a warning, okay, but something to keep in mind, is that when you make a difficult choice, you also choose the consequences, both expected and unexpected. My unexpected consequences. Like I said, I ended up in cuffs because she had gone to the police several days later. She showed them the bruises on her hands where they had cuffed her, and showed them the bruise on her back where they had knelt on her on the floor. And she said, I did it to her. She said, I took my guns, I pointed it to her head, I was going to threaten her, I had guns, my dad had guns, we had guns, we target shoot. I know in the Northeast that's like a funky kind of thing, but the rest of the country it's a pretty common kind of thing. So the end result of that was I lost my right to own guns. The state of New Jersey decided to use me as a test case. They took my guns away from me and made it very, very difficult for me to get them back. It ended up in a very, very long litigation, which I'll tell you about later. They used me as a test case because, as you'll see in the end, I won custody of my children. Don't have a traffic ticket to my name, so if they can take my guns, they can do it to anybody. But anyway, this is not a discussion about guns, not a discussion about that, but that was the consequence of doing that. And of course, the consequence of doing that was, a more acrimonious divorce. The final order of divorce. I told you New Jersey has a crazy court system. We don't have to read. I'm not going to hand this out to anybody. But on an 8-year marriage, where I had full custody of all 5 kids, they awarded her lifetime alimony. I guess they felt sorry for her. She had no responsibility to the children, none. I was instructed to pay for them, care for them, and pay for her. She, of course, from that day on, from that verdict, never saw or spoke to her kids again. But she did collect checks for the next 20 years or so. I was now in a situation where essentially 100% of the money that I was earning would go to her. I had very, very little money left for me and the kids. Several attorneys I went to said it was the worst divorce judgment they had ever heard. I did have a very, very poor attorney to start with, but the case was appealed. Everybody was asking me, didn't you appeal, didn't you appeal, didn't you appeal? Of course I did, twice to the appellate court. The senior partner of the law firm, who doesn't handle family law, actually handled it for me. But the jurisdiction in which I live is not very sympathetic to men. They didn't really care. They viewed me as a rich white guy from New Jersey, and they didn't really care. Didn't really care is what it came down to. So I was left with this incredible burden, okay? So I sold our house. I moved into a crappy house with my 5 kids. I remember we had barely one working bathroom, but I'm a pretty mechanical kind of guy, so I was able to fix up things. I borrowed money from my mom, borrowed money on credit cards. I had to somehow come up with enough money to meet these new obligations, or I might end up in jail. Okay? I felt like a beast of burden with a 20-year jail sentence in front of me, because remember, I'm a young guy, didn't expect to have these kids. Not that I love them, of course. There's nothing to do, I'm trapped. Okay. If a fight with the government over my guns, a crazy divorce, okay? 5 hurt and damaged kids to raise, okay? And a failing business. I decided to emotionally eat. In fact, my doctor told me that my 300 pounds on my 5-foot 10-inch frame was going to end my life on this earth very, very quickly. Okay? I was angry. I was looking for someone or something to blame, my wife, the legal system, God. I was really feeling sorry for myself, right? I was pathetic. And I was lonely. My wife had left me. Now, I was a chick magnet. 300 pounds, 5 messed up kids to take care of, a failing business, okay? It's just ladies, bring it on. By the way, I've written a lot of articles on dating as a single dad, by the way. So I talk a little bit about this, some of the funny experiences. I've sort of reversed the roles. There's a great movie, by the way. There's a line where this woman's trying to date this man and he has 5 kids, but anyway, I'll leave that out. It's a funny thing. I've used it before. But I also knew I needed to fix my situation, right? And that fix had to start with me. Success lesson number 8. Do not blame others for your problems and accept the responsibility for what has happened to you. I chose my wife. I chose to have 5 kids with her. I chose to be in the photographic business. I chose to overeat. Right? Everything that was going on in my life was my fault. And the sooner I realized that, the sooner I was going to correct the problem. And where was the motivation to correct that problem going to come from? That's success lesson number 9, which is to look for the motivation to do what it takes to succeed from within you. Right? Nobody was going to step in and help me get through this. It was my responsibility, my fault. Okay? But what I will tell you is that I looked into the eyes of my 5 little children. They're really beautiful little kids. Of course, every father thinks their kids are beautiful. I knew they were looking at me to save them and help them, right? So I certainly wanted to make things better bad enough, right? Now, I said look for success within yourself, but sometimes, like when I hired my 2 nannies from Israel, it's sometimes necessary to ask for help. But in some cases, more importantly, to be open to getting help from unexpected sources. By this time in my life, I had been very isolated. I wouldn't call myself an atheist to say, but I was a math major, right? So everything is kind of like straightforward. I'm going to tell you a little story. I had taken the kids on a trip to Miami to sort of escape it was a very low budget trip too, imagine, those of you who have kids, right? Imagine like 5 kids and me in one room and, that kind of thing. This was not, I don't want you to think I was staying like at the Ritz-Carlton, in Biscayne Bay or anything like that. This was, like whatever it was. And on the way back, I was sitting in the plane and the seat was open right next to me. I was sort of thinking, oh great, I get 2 open seats because the kids were all in kind of the seats behind me. And just before the plane door closes, a religious man walked onto the plane and he sits down right next to me. It's one of those moments in life where you're sort of like laughing about it. I'm Jewish. He was a religious Jewish man, and it doesn't matter what religion you are, if you see somebody who is more religious sitting next to you, you always got that little bit of like guilt, right? Right? Doesn't really matter it doesn't matter what it is. So imagine you're Catholic, right, and the priest sits down next to you. You're like, uh-oh, what's coming, right? So we naturally, it's a 2.5-hour flight. It's not back then. There wasn't like much in the way of entertainment or so on. So we start talking about our circumstance. And he, of course, is a family guy. He's got like 6 kids of his own, his little thing. He hears my story. And he very simply says, I'm going to give you a little tip, something that I do every day that helps me. He says, I want you to go to this website. It's called aish.com and sign up for their daily emails. And every day you're going to get an email from them, and it's going to give you some life advice. It'll probably be helpful for you. It turns out the advice I got from that website actually began the big transformation in my life. I have some great stories, which I'll leave because we're short on time, about how the very first email came actually helped me deal with the anger that I had in my life about seeking revenge on people. It was amazing. I thought he had sent it, by the way, but he didn't. So I'm going to share a little bit of that advice with you today because I think that it's going to be really helpful for you, and I'll talk about how it transformed me. So I found my spiritual side. Okay? For me, this was a really big deal. It's been a humongous, and I use that word very infrequently, source of inspiration to me throughout my life. Just when you think that things are at their worst, you just need to know that God has your back. Right? And if you're open to it, it'll come to you, I promise you. If you don't think you need it, that's fine, but if you're open to it, it'll come to you. It is a huge source of strength. I found gratitude. Really, I just, I painted this bleak picture of my circumstance, but really, right? I'm a smart guy. I had a business, right? I could have had a 9-to-5 job. Imagine if I had a 9-to-5 job and I had to take care of these kids and pay for nannies and stuff. I was lucky. I had a business. It gave me flexible hours. It gave me resources. It gave me all sorts of abilities that I wouldn't have had. I was very grateful for that. My kids may have been hurt by their mom, but I had 5 healthy kids, and they are freaking smart. I was blessed. I had good health. I had the own internal strength, right, to make myself better. These are all things to be enormously grateful for. Okay? I started to make a list, right? A lot of motivational speakers tell you to do this, but it's actually a really good thing. It helps me. I can actually show you right now that I actually make a list of things I'm grateful for. And I try to add to that list, and I look at it. Now, I know when you're pissed off in life and you have things that are going wrong, you don't feel like doing it, but I'm telling you, it's actually a really good trick. It's really helped me a lot. So I recommend you do that. Right? It's a really easy thing to do. I actually keep it in my Google Docs on my phone. So every once in a while, I open it up and I look at it. Okay? This is something that's really big, and I don't mean to be sexist, but this is something that guys need to work on, I think, a little bit more sometimes than women. But anger is a completely wasted emotion, particularly the kind of anger I wanted to show, because I wanted to hurt people. Yeah? I grew up, I was thinking, I envisioned a falling safe landing in a very strategic spot several times. Okay? But focusing on that really solves nothing at all. Nothing. And in fact, I found that anger actually dissipates your energy, which prevents you from doing constructive and positive things. Okay, now everybody always says to me, anger is not a wasted emotion. What if your family comes under attack and and so on? Okay, defend your family with anger if that helps you, but actually I find in dangerous circumstance to be really cool and really calculating. But that's just me. Okay. So I always say anger is a wasted emotion. Don't use it, right? If you want to apply it to a business principle, how many of you have been angry at somebody at work and sent an angry email? Right? And then how many of you regretted that we send that email? So I have a business rule. When you're angry, never send an email. Let it sit 24 hours. 9 times out of 10, you never send it. Right? And you don't make business decisions when you're angry either. Right? And you don't make business decisions for revenge. Okay? You don't do that kind of thing. I also realized that material possessions don't provide happiness. Graduated out of college, had this big business running, 5 share of the film market and everything, and I was miserable. Because the people, my wife, was not a good choice. Okay, obviously. Okay? It turns out that if you really want to find happiness in your life, you focus on the people in your life and the experiences. And the pursuit of material possessions actually detracts from your happiness. Right? That's like a whole nother talk on its own, but it certainly does. I made time for myself. I started to channel that adult ADHD that I have, and I realized that I can get all of this done, but if I didn't make time for myself, in other words, time to go work out, time to go do my photography, or do the things that I really liked, I was less productive. Everybody knows this, right? Everybody's heard this kind of thing, but it's actually something you have to do. But it's not just have to do it because we say, okay, I need to work out today because I know it's good for me, but you need to do it without guilt. And when you have 5 kids at home, right, that are missing you, and you have a business that's running, which could be on fire when you're not there, it's very hard to sometimes find that space to do it. But you have to do it, and you have to do it without guilt. That's a hard one for me, by the way. I guess it was my Jewish mother or something like that. But eliminating that guilt is really hard for me. Okay? I learned to be humble. Right? Another hard one for me. Graduate degree, Ivy League school, running a business. I was king of the photo industry, all of this stuff going on, and God just went like this, just crushed me. Right? So I learned that no matter what you have in life, right, always be aware of where you stand. There's a really good, I didn't plan this, but I'm actually going to talk about it, there's a really great thing I learned from that H.com. And it says the secret to success actually is having 2 pieces of paper and you put 1 in each pocket. Okay? The one in your left pocket says, I'm nothing but dust. Right? Because we're born from nothing and we die to nothing. And the one in the right pocket says, the world was created for me. Right? Seize the day. Success comes from knowing which piece of paper to pull out at which moment. Sorry, let me back up one sec here. Right? I learned to trust. Right? Trust really hard. When you have people betray you in your life, it's really hard. But you won't find success unless you learn to trust the right people. Right? I needed to learn to trust my staff. I needed to learn to trust my kids. But for me, the hardest thing was needing to learn to trust myself. Okay? I needed to make physical health a priority. This is one of my favorite sayings. It's one of my most tweeted sayings, which is that physical strength is the foundation for emotional and mental strength. If you are physically weak, in poor health, you will not be good in business, I promise you. It gives you the strength in order to make the tough decisions and endure stress. I like to use a sports example for that. How many times have you watched two equally matched teams play each other, and the first team that actually physically tires makes mental mistakes? They commit penalties, they make lapses on defense, and so if you believe that you can be physically weak and not in good shape and be super successful, you're wrong. Okay? So with all of that wisdom and all of those things that I've been through, okay, I started to fix my life. And that started with my physical health. After a year of hard work, I lost 100 pounds. And I actually, being the shy kid that I was from New Jersey, actually ended up allowing myself to be body painted at a photo show at the Javits Center, and actually was on display. It was a really cool thing. I got a lot of credit because I was next to really young models who were all buff and everything, and I did that. So as a 50-year-old guy doing that, I'm pretty happy with myself that I overcame it. Okay, remember I told you, I began this by saying don't quit. After 6 years and a lot of money in legal fees and the full weight of the state of New Jersey and its Attorney General on top of me, I fought them, and I won probably the only Second Amendment case ever in the history of New Jersey and beat them in the Supreme Court. They threatened to put me in jail with my little 5 kids. They didn't care. They had a law, they had a political agenda they wanted passed, but I wouldn't let them beat me. So don't quit. People ask me to share my story. I have a pretty interesting story, a pretty motivating kind of story. So I started writing blogs. Just simple stuff, you know, about what it was like to be a single parent, what it's like to date as a single parent, what my daughters thought of me. One of the most successful articles I ever wrote was, can a dad be a role model for his daughters? It actually got picked up by a magazine. It's got like hundreds of thousands of views. It's a really kind of cool piece. It makes me kind of get teary-eyed when I see it too. I got pictures of my daughters in there and so on. I then very quickly got asked, I'm writing on the Good Men Project. I've written probably 30 or 40 articles for them, the Huffington Post. Then of course I said, aha, I can make money out of this, so maybe I'm going to write for some business magazines too. And I started to write for some business magazines. Entrepreneur Magazine picked me up. I write regularly for them. My audience started to grow pretty big. I eventually became an expert on TV for photography and a few other things. I've been on national TV many times talking about all sorts of stuff like this. So for me, the writing was not only something, you know, from a business sense to really grow my audience and my personal brand, because I talk a lot about personal branding. It actually helped me in my business. I used my personal brand to build my photo company, which I'll talk about really quickly soon. Okay? So I had been given this opportunity. It was a chance for me to share. It was a chance. What's that? Okay, so Tucker Carlson, right, in person is completely different than he is on the air, and he was raised by a single father, so we had a bonding moment, just so you should know. So he's a pretty interesting guy. He's much calmer, like he's much more amiable in person. So it's for what it's worth. So I had a really good experience sharing my stuff, because when you connect with other single parents, you connect with parents. Like I can tell already who the parents are in this room by the way they're looking at me, right? Because we connect on a different level. And that connection actually ended up being very cathartic for me. It was really helping me. When you teach somebody something and you share something like that, it actually helps you heal and you actually make a difference. So success lesson number 11 is to teach others, that's the T in quit, and pay it forward. Okay? It's a really big deal in this world. You know, karma, right? You pay it forward, right? And I'm a very, very lucky man. On the business side, Remember I told you all the camera stores went out of business? Those were our customers. Our business almost failed. So you know what I did? I decided to open a camera store because my customers weren't buying from me anymore. I said, they're not friggin' doing it right. So we're going to open a camera store. And so I went out and innovated, thought out of the box, did all of those cliches, did all of those things, and I reinvented the camera store. We opened a camera store in New Jersey in 2007. And we ended up having one of the most successful camera stores in history. Okay? In 2008 and 2013, we were picked as best camera store in the country. Okay? I actually won the Photo Person of the Year award out of doing that. Really cool. It's kind of, you get a plaque, you have to go to Las Vegas and pay your way there, and all of those things. I use my personal brand. A lot of the stuff that I talked about, for those of you who think about a personal brand, I talked about my fatherhood. I talked about all sorts of things and drew a lot of people into my business. Okay? And the really happy ending to this is in 2015, I got to sell this business and actually walk away with a check, because every camera store that operates today actually operates off the model that I recreated. It's an education-based model. Creates an experience in retail. As a matter of fact, I look at Barnes & Noble right now. They should let me run the place. I'll fix that store for them. Right? Because the experience in Barnes & Noble, not so amazing, right? Okay? So there you know, in 5 years, we became the third largest single location camera store in the country. And we were picked, like I said, best camera store in the country during those years. Okay? With all of that being said, I got to write a book, right? Because that's what we do nowadays. When you go through enough crap in your life, right? You get to write a book. So how many people in here have said, I'm going to write a book? Right? Everybody says they're going to write a book. Here's my advice to you. Don't. Okay? It is an extremely painful process. I spent 6 months writing my book, okay, and then threw out the first 6 months because it was total crap. Okay? And then wrote the book again, and it's been a long journey. I had a publisher. Publisher dropped me because they said I was going to get sued by my ex-wives. I had legal review. I had all sorts of things. I self-published my own book. It ended up being #1 on Amazon in new releases under self-help books. And I'm going to read you a little, like, 30-second passage from the book, if you don't want, since you kind of have connected with my kids a little bit, okay? This is, by the way, so since we're in a business seminar, so this is a good way to get people to actually buy your book, is you, while they're sitting in front of you and they can't move, is you actually read them a little bit from your book, okay? Okay. Now, I was a math major in college, right? So writing, okay, we're getting there, okay? So this is from the epilogue of my book. When I first faced those tear-stained faces of my kids looking up at me, stricken with fear over their mother's violent actions, I felt though time had stopped. I was frozen in disbelief at what was happening to me, not to them. My first thought was about me. What the hell was I going to do? I felt like frost had taken over my soul, and all I could feel was cold. I saw before me only a bleak future filled with despair, sadness, and isolation. A lifetime alone with all these kids. A lifetime alone. Any notions of joy or health or financial success flew from me like the north wind had blown in. But I couldn't have been more wrong. My children, in each of their own way, through their own individual triumphs and tragedies, have defined me for the word blessing. And my kids have been a blessing to me. So I promised I'd tell you really quickly what they're up to. Okay? That's a picture just a couple of years, like a year or two old. That's my 5 kids today. You saw them when they were little kids. I'll start with my youngest. She's second from your right, the one in the black right there. That's Sarah. She actually just graduated Pace University, summa cum laude, first in her class. She's an amazing young lady, and she actually works for a big financial institution in Manhattan. Her older sister, middle sister, which is to her right, that's Rebecca. She actually graduated from George Washington University, Elliott School of International Affairs, magna cum laude. She's fluent in Mandarin, and she works for a place in Washington I can't tell you about. That's Zach, by the way, the soccer player all the way to the right. He's actually still working at the store, at the company I sold. He manages the store, and he's finishing his degree at Baruch College in Manhattan right now. The one in the graduation cap, some of you may recognize it. He just graduated from Columbia University, cum laude, and he actually does very, very significant nonprofit work, very proud of what he does in support of Israel. And then my oldest daughter, which actually she's like the littlest one, right? It's really weird when they're different sizes like that. My oldest daughter, Michelle, which is right next to her, she actually went to Northwestern University, right? Yeah, I had big, big college bills, like crazy. That's where the hair went, actually. She graduated from Northwestern University. She actually works out in the Midwest. She is married, the only of my children that are married. And yes, I have a grandchild now. So she's, that's taken only a month. That's only taken like a month or two ago, right? Right. So it took me a while to admit this because I'm way too young to have grandchildren, right? Right. No, okay. No, she's an amazing young lady. My daughter's amazing. My grandchild is amazing. It's really just a blessing, like I said, to have come from where we come from. So when my kids are all together, we all know where we came from and what we've been through. So it's really, quite an amazing thing every time we get together. Okay, just a few minutes more and we'll be done. Success lesson number 12, and I am living proof of this. Bad things happen, but when we are finite and cannot see the whole picture or to the end of times, say to yourself, I haven't yet figured out why, but God knows someday this will help me be successful. Right? My kids raised me. I was an arrogant, scared young man. And raising my kids actually transformed me into like a man as opposed to a kid. So no matter how bad things are, just understand that someplace it probably will show you that it was for the best. Okay, our quit method, right? This is what we need to do. Don't quit, right? This is how we create success. Don't quit because while you're still alive, right, there's still hope for success. We talked about understanding all the aspects of the problem before you initiate your solutions, right? And I mean really understand it like you've not understood it before, not just on the surface, because until you understand the nature, I had to understand the nature of why I married such a person, of why I created the business model I did. All of those things were required for me to solve my problems. And then sometimes you just need to innovate, and if you don't, you won't, which is hard, right? Because I'm asking, you have to create something. But to be successful, all successful people innovate. And of course, biggie for me is teach and pay it forward. It will come back to you. They always say charity comes back to you, and it does. Okay? Now, the ability to be successful is within everybody in this audience. Right? I'm not better than anybody. I'm not. I'm just a kid who grew up in New Jersey. Okay? I was just really desperate. Right? My kids, their well-being, their survival actually made me really desperate, okay? So if you want to overcome anything and be successful, you just have to ask yourself one question. Here it is, right? One question. You can be successful. And that's, how badly do you want it? And if you want something bad enough, you can actually make anything happen. Thank you all for listening to me today. I appreciate the time, and I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you. Great. Woohoo!